In 1999, 27 teenagers left for their senior camping trip and never came home. There was no crash site, no wreckage, just silence. For 22 years, people blamed the forest or fate or each other. But when that yellow bus finally reappeared, moss-covered and swallowed by trees, it brought something else with it. Something none of us were ready to face. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from, down in the comments, and tap that like and subscribe if stories like this ever brush past your hometown or your own life. Every click helps pull another forgotten name back into the light. My name is Blake Hammond. I grew up in Forest Grove, Oregon, back when life felt smaller and safer. I was 17 the year we graduated, one of those kids who stayed behind the camera because it was easier than being in front of it. I was always filming things, hallway scenes, yearbook interviews, late-night bonfires. That spring, I told everyone I was working on a documentary. Really, I just didn't want to forget anyone. The class of '99 was close, not perfect. But we knew each other in ways you only do in small towns. Claire Benton was our valedictorian. Her dad, Mayor Benton, liked to call her his golden girl at city council meetings. You'd never know from the outside how hard she worked just to hold it all together. Marcus Avery was built like a linebacker because he was one bound for Oregon State with every expectation on his shoulders. And then there was Sophie Lynn. Nobody ever remembered when she entered a room, but she had this way of watching that made you wonder what she saw. Her sketchbook never left her side. She used to draw the forest a lot, even when we weren't anywhere near it. The week before the trip, the school was buzzing. Finals were over, caps and gowns pressed, and the seniors were counting down the hours. Someone played Green Day in the parking lot on repeat. I spent the afternoon filming us packing the bus, laughing, posing, saying things like, "Last one before adulthood." The campground was out past the river 3 hours deep into the Rogue River Siskiyou forest. No cell towers, no chaperones, except for 2 teachers. Just us and the woods. Our regular driver had called out sick that Friday night. In his place, they brought in someone new. Dean Rafferty. Older man, hands like ropes smelled faintly of coffee and exhaust. He didn't talk much, just nodded when the principal handed him the clipboard and climbed into the driver's seat like he'd done it 100 times. We left that Saturday morning just after 9. Parents waved. A few held camcorders. I remember Claire's mom clutching a plastic grocery bag filled with granola bars and allergy meds. Sophie was sitting by the window, already sketching something before we'd pulled out of the parking lot. That was the last time most people saw us. That evening, Jessica Carmichael's mom got a voicemail. The timestamp said 6:42 p.m. You can hear kids laughing in the background, someone shouting. Then a voice. Jessica's half whispered, "Turn that off." Then, static. No goodbye, no hang-up click, just static. And that was when everything started to unravel. The message came through just after 6:40. Jessica's voice caught mid-laugh, then cut short. "Turn that off," someone said behind her, not yelling exactly, just sharp enough to register. And then nothing. No click, no goodbye. Just that static hum. Mrs. Carmichael played it for the police the next day. Played it for me, too, a week later. It was short, maybe 8 seconds. But it stayed in my head like a splinter. By the time I heard it, everything had already gone wrong. The bus never made it to the campsite. That was the first official note on the report. They were supposed to arrive at Cedar Hollow by 7 that night. Check-in was Standard Park Unload sign, the roster radio back to the school district. That never happened. At first, people figured it was weather. Fog had rolled in heavy that evening, the kind that dims your high beams and turns the road into soup. The route up through the forest was narrow, mostly gravel with blind curves and a few steep shoulders. Still, it wasn't anything a standard bus couldn't handle. They'd taken it the year before. That first night, the rangers figured the group probably pulled off to wait it out. It wasn't until the next morning that phones started ringing. Parents checking in. First a few, then a dozen, then all of them. No one had heard anything since the bus pulled out of the high school lot the day before. No calls, no texts, no photos posted, not even a late-night voicemail. Just Jessica's message, and that was it. By noon, the principal had contacted state police. Search and rescue mobilized out of Grants Pass by sundown. Helicopters went up before dark, but the fog still hadn't cleared. They were forced to ground them after 2 passes. The dogs came the next day, 2 bloodhounds and a retired FEMA lab. They picked up a weak scent trail along Route 219 near where the forest road breaks off toward the camp. But it ended near a bend in the gravel where a thin runoff creek washed through. No tire marks, no signs of skidding, just damp ground and brush. It rained that whole week. Hard, steady, soaking rain that stripped bark off trees and turned every footprint into slurry. The dogs lost the trail by the second afternoon. The campground manager confirmed no group had checked in. The cabins stayed empty. The fire pits still held last weekend's ash. Rangers walked all 6 trail loops. Nothing. Not a single scrap of clothing, no wrappers, no gear. The only real lead came 9 days in. A fisherman named Clyde Jeffers was hiking out past the north bend of the river when he spotted something half buried in the mud. Looked like trash, at first plastic casing cracked. When he kicked it over, he saw the winding knob. It was a disposable camera. Jeffers turned it over to the sheriff's office. The outer shell was waterlogged, but the inside was intact. Problem was, the film had been removed. Just a blank case. The kind of thing you'd only do if you wanted what was inside to disappear. About 2 weeks after the search started, another strange piece surfaced. A letter, hand-delivered to the Callahan home. No return address, no stamp. Just folded and slipped through the mail slot. 5 words written in shaky block letters. We made it. Please stop looking. That was all. No names, no dates. The Callahans gave it to the police immediately. It shook everybody. There was a hope buried in it for about a minute, but handwriting analysis flagged it fast. The shape of the letters didn't match Trevor Callahan's school records. The ink was smudged too precisely, like someone had tried to make it look clumsy on purpose. It felt wrong. Like a copy of something not the real thing. If anything, it only deepened the divide. People started whispering that the kids ran away, that they faked it, that maybe one of the teachers, Mr. Muse or Miss Crawford, had planned something. There were rumors about cults, about that stretch of forest being cursed. A few even blamed the substitute driver, Dean Rafferty, said he was never properly vetted, that the school hired him last minute and no one could find his background past 95. But every tip, every angle led back to the same thing, nothing. After 6 weeks, the state declared it a non-recoverable case. No evidence of foul play, no crime scene, no bus, no bodies. Just 27 people who vanished between a high school parking lot and a campsite they never reached. I didn't sleep much that summer. Neither did most of the parents. I know because I'd see them walking the tree lines. Down by the old mill. Past the quarry. places they'd already searched twice over. They went anyway, hoping they missed something, hoping someone would come home. David Holt, Trevor's dad, started keeping a binder. Printouts, maps, clippings, phone numbers. He showed it to me once years later. It was thick like a phone book. Color-coded tabs for each name, marked dates and interviews. He'd written a note in the front cover. I don't think they got lost. I think someone took them, or something did. He didn't say what he meant by that, and no one ever proved him wrong. The official word came that fall. Forest Grove High installed a bronze plaque near the front steps. All 27 names. Gone but never forgotten. Class of 1999. The candles came next. Every year on June 5th, the faculty lit one for each missing person. Some of the teachers retired early after that. Couldn't handle the weight of that silence. Others stayed. You'd see it in their eyes, looking out the window a little longer than usual. Waiting. The families handled it differently. Some moved away. Couldn't take walking past bedrooms that still smelled like teen cologne and shampoo. Others kept everything exactly as it was. Trophies on the shelves, beds made, posters untouched. Elaine Benton changed her daughter Claire's sheets every Sunday, just in case. When I came back home one Christmas, I passed Sophie Lynn's house. The porch light was still on. Her sketchbook, the one she carried everywhere, was still on the table just inside the window. I stood there for a long time, trying to remember what the last thing she drew was. I couldn't, but I remembered how quiet she was that morning on the bus. Not scared, just watching, almost like she already knew. After the first month, the phone calls slowed, not because anyone had answers, but because people stopped expecting them. The town still held its breath, but quieter now, like someone waiting for a noise that never came. Forest Grove kept showing up news crews, out-of-town volunteers, even a few psychics. But underneath it all, we started getting used to the silence. That was the part that surprised me. Not how quickly the search ended, but how quickly the doubt settled in. Not from strangers, from people we knew, neighbors, teachers, a few parents. You'd catch it in their voices when they thought no one was listening. Maybe they didn't want to be found. Maybe they planned it. It started with little things. People pointing out how some of the kids were struggling. Tyrese Avery had pressure from scouts. Claire Benton was under constant scrutiny from her father. Rumors spread about Sophie Lynn keeping a second sketchbook filled with darker stuff she never showed anyone. Even my own name started turning up in those conversations. Someone asked my sister if I'd been acting strange before the trip. She said no. But then again, I always kept to myself. I heard later that one of the detectives came by my mom's place asking if I'd left any journals behind. I hadn't. I didn't even have a proper backpack on that trip, just the camera and 2 spare tapes. They never recovered those either. I don't remember who said it first, but once the idea took hold, it didn't let go. What if the kids had run off, started a new life? What if the teachers helped them? It seemed impossible, but then again, everything about the case already felt that way. The lack of evidence made it easier for people to insert their own answers. A classmate's aunt swore she saw someone who looked like Claire at a gas station near Bend. Another said they'd heard whispers of a group living off-grid in the mountains calling themselves the Clear Ones. The police looked into it, but it didn't go anywhere. Still, those stories floated through town like fog. Some people started blaming the parents, saying they pressured their kids too much, pushed them to perform. Others said the teachers should have known better than to bring them so far out without phone service. But the worst of it was how people turned on the families who kept pushing. They called them obsessive unwell, said they needed to accept it and move on. Elaine Benton was one of them. She never stopped talking about Claire in the present tense. She still wore her daughter's necklace, a little gold heart, and you'd see her rearranging flowers by the memorial every week, even in the dead of winter. One night, I remember watching from my car as someone approached her while she was lighting candles by the school steps. I couldn't hear what was said, but I saw Elaine flinch, then quietly pick up her things and leave. After that, she stopped coming during daylight, only after dark. I think she just didn't want to hear it anymore. I tried telling a few people that something was off. Not just the disappearance, but everything leading up to it. The substitute driver, Dean Rafferty, no one knew where he came from. I'd asked around at the school after everything happened, and not a single staff member remembered hiring him directly. He wasn't listed in the original rotation. The district said they pulled him from a third-party sublist, but when a parent tried to track that company down, they got nothing, no website, no office, no record of contracts. I brought this up at a town meeting that fall. They let me speak for less than 3 minutes. Nobody followed up. It was like the case had turned into this uncomfortable object, too painful to hold, too strange to explain. So everyone just put it back on the shelf. I started writing things down. I still have the notebook. Just simple entries date what I noticed, what people said, what I remembered. I wasn't trying to be an investigator. I just didn't want the details to disappear. I found a scrap of paper in the AV room about 2 months after the trip. It had been shoved behind the editing cabinet. Looked like a class schedule at first, but the dates were wrong. It listed the weekend of the trip, but under a different location, something called Station Hollow. I circled the name and asked one of the old janitors about it. He said it sounded familiar, but he couldn't place it. I later found out from an old topographic map that there used to be a ranger substation called Hollow Point, about 4 miles west of the designated campsite. It'd been decommissioned in the early 80s. No roads in or out anymore, just marked trails and overgrowth. I told one of the detectives about it, Detective Hess, I think. He nodded, wrote something down, and thanked me for my time. But I could tell. He wasn't going to follow up. I was still 17 then, still just a kid. They didn't see me as a witness, only a leftover. I thought about going out there myself, to Hollow Point, but I didn't. I still don't know if that was fear or common sense. That fall, I overheard a conversation between 2 teachers in the staff parking lot. One of them said if they wanted to be found, they would have left more than bones. The other didn't reply, just closed her car door and drove off. The strange thing was, this was months before any remains had been found. At the time, we didn't know for sure that any of them were gone. Not officially. That sentence stuck with me, like someone had already made peace with the ending before it was written. Looking back, I think that's when I knew I was alone in how I saw it. Not everyone wanted the truth. Not everyone could handle it. Some people needed the mystery to stay a mystery, because if it wasn't, then someone had to be responsible. And that was harder to accept. Harder than silence. Harder than loss. A few weeks before winter break, I received a letter. No stamp, no return address. Just my name first and last written in clean blue ink. Inside was a photo. grainy scanned probably from a yearbook. It was our class picture, but someone had taken a pen and drawn small pale X's over certain faces. Not all of them, just some. I was one of the ones without an X. On the back in the same blue ink were 3 words. They remember you. I brought it to the school office. The secretary stared at it, said she'd pass it along to administration. I never heard anything back. I don't know who sent it. I don't know what it meant, but something told me it wasn't a joke. It was quiet, intentional, just like everything else. I stopped mentioning the letter after the third person brushed it off. A few weeks later, I moved it to the back of a drawer in my old desk and left it there. I didn't stop thinking about it, but I stopped expecting anyone to take it seriously. People had already made up their minds about what they believed either we were dead or we didn't want to be found. Either way, I was an exception that didn't fit neatly into anyone's version of the story. For a while, I thought maybe I really was the only one left. I started avoiding people I used to know. Classmates, neighbors, even some of the teachers who'd been there that year. I didn't trust the way they looked at me, not suspicious exactly, but wary, like I might say something they weren't ready to hear. So I kept to myself. I worked nights for a while at a warehouse in Salem. Lived cheap. Didn't keep photos in the apartment. I had a routine wake-work walk the same 3 blocks home. No TV, no music, just silence. You'd be surprised how quickly you can get used to it. But there were nights when that silence felt too exact, too careful, like someone else was holding it steady. I started keeping blinds shut even in the daytime. Sometimes I'd catch myself standing by the door without remembering why I walked over. I told myself it was nothing. But then I'd hear something, a scrape at the window, a knock that didn't come again, a car idling outside, just a beat too long. I never saw anyone, and I never called anyone. I knew better. Once you say it out loud, people start asking where you've been, and I didn't have a version of the truth that made sense to anyone but me. It wasn't until I heard about the bus that everything broke open again. June 3rd, 2021. I still remember the way the news anchor said it, a rusted school bus discovered deep in the Rogue River Siskiyou forest. No road in, no path, no wreckage pattern. Just found, like something returned. They showed a partial photo from the scene, moss-covered metal broken windows, the side barely legible, but I knew that shape. I'd seen it every night in my dreams. I'd walked the aisle in my sleep 1,000 times. The news didn't mention the number on the side, but I knew it was bus 57. Hours. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't sleep the one after either. The police said there were remains inside. 17 bodies. The number hit me like something cold down the back of my neck. 27 of us left that morning. That meant 10 were still missing. I was one. I didn't know who the others were. I couldn't bring myself to ask. I kept waiting for someone to contact me. They didn't. I watched the coverage quietly like everyone else. But I knew things no one was saying on camera. The bus was found too deep in the forest to have gotten there on wheels. That model couldn't fit through the undergrowth, and there weren't any cut tracks wide enough for it, which meant it had been moved there placed, and not recently. They said some of the backpacks still had straps. Molded, decayed, but intact. Personal items were found. Letters, caps, sketches. When they mentioned sketches, I froze. Sophie Lynn had been drawing in her notebook the morning we left. She was sitting 2 rows behind me on the right side. Her pencil never stopped moving. They said the drawings found in the bus weren't typical. One described image after image of figures in the woods, circles, masks, symbols that didn't match any known language. I didn't need to see them to remember. She'd shown me one once, the night before we left. We were standing near the locker bank, and she slipped it from her sleeve. A circle of people in robes, trees with faces hidden in their bark. I'd laughed, said she'd been watching too many movies. She didn't smile, just folded it back up and said, "Not everything starts as a story." They also mentioned a folder tucked beneath the driver's seat. It had her initials, SL, in the corner of one page. But they didn't find her body. Not among the 17. That fact kept spinning in my head. If I'd made it out, maybe she had too. But she wasn't at home. Her family had moved away. Her old house had been sold. I checked. And I kept checking, even though I didn't know what I'd do if I found her. In the weeks after the bus was recovered, people started remembering again. Newspapers brought it all back: photos, interviews, timelines. I saw my own face in a collage printed in the back of the Gazette. I didn't reach out. I didn't explain. I kept quiet because something in me said it wasn't over. That bus was never supposed to be found. Its discovery wasn't an answer. It was a breach. And whatever had stayed quiet for 22 years had just been disturbed. That's when the messages started again. Notes, slips of paper. One was folded and left on the windshield of a car I hadn't driven in weeks. It had my name and nothing else. Another was slid into my mailbox. No envelope, just a piece of cardstock with a charcoal drawing of trees' dents, bent inward shadows between them, shaped like figures. At first, I thought I was imagining it, that I was unraveling again. But the third one arrived in a padded mailer with no return address. Inside was a cassette tape, unlabeled. I had to dig through a box in the attic to find an old player that still worked. The audio was damaged, staticky, warped in places, but I recognized one voice. Claire Benton. Faint, distant, like she was whispering through layers of cloth. I played it 3 times before I could make out the words. "We're not alone," she said. Tell them we tried." That was it. Just that line. And then the sound of footsteps on dried leaves. And breathing. Not hers. Someone else's, heavier, slower, closer to the mic than she was. I shut it off. Sat in the dark for almost an hour without moving. When I turned the lights back on, the player was still running tape, spooling out. I rewound it once, but I've never played it again. I don't need to. That voice, her voice, it burned into something I can't shut off. I didn't tell anyone, not at first, but I knew what it meant. Whatever we saw out there didn't end when we vanished. It just waited. And now, for some reason, I still didn't understand it was moving again. Looking back, I think that's the night I stopped running. Not because I felt safe, but because I knew something had already found me. And the next step wasn't hiding. It was remembering. I didn't go back into the woods right away, even after the tape, even after Claire's voice. There was this line in my head, and for a long time, I stayed behind it. I told myself remembering was enough, that I could just pass the information along and keep my distance. But something had shifted after that envelope arrived, after the last word on that tape. Tell them we tried. The phrase stayed with me like a breath I couldn't let out. And for the first time since coming back, I started thinking about what I hadn't told anyone. Things I'd buried so deep, I wasn't even sure if they were real or just what I told myself they had been. I started with the basics. I took out my old notes, the ones I'd stopped writing years ago, flipped through the pages and cross-checked names. Who was identified, who wasn't. 17 bodies found. 27 students and 2 faculty left that morning. That meant 12 were still unaccounted for, not 10. I'd miscounted. Or I'd been given the wrong number. Either way, it didn't add up. I started going back through everything, newspaper clippings, interviews, even the online message boards that had turned the case into a kind of urban legend. In one forum, buried 3 pages deep in a thread about forest disappearances, someone had posted a list of names taken from a school yearbook scan. It was incomplete, some names blurred out, but beside it, someone had typed in bold letters, 19, gone, 10, found, not 17, not 12, 19. It didn't make sense, unless the number of recovered remains had quietly changed. I couldn't confirm it, no official source said it outright, but the wording in the police press release had been vague. 17 individuals presumed to be students. Presumed. No breakdown of gender, no confirmation of which teachers, if any, were among them. That was the first thread. I pulled on it gently, trying not to lose the shape of what I already knew. I didn't want theories. I wanted facts, something I could hold. A week later, I drove out to Medford to talk to someone I hadn't seen in over 20 years. His name was Charlie Givens, and he'd been a junior forest technician in '99, part of the original search team. He was retired now, lived out near the hills, the kind of house with wind chimes on the porch and pine needles packed into the driveway gravel. He didn't recognize me at first, or maybe he did, and just didn't want to admit it. I introduced myself. Told him I was working on something. A personal history. He nodded once, slow. Invited me inside. We sat in silence longer than we spoke. I asked what he remembered from that search. He said the dogs had trouble tracking scent beyond the road. Said the forest had a kind of noise to it that week, like things weren't where they were supposed to be. Then he paused and looked down at his hands. Said there was a clearing they'd marked on day 5. Small circle, burn marks around the edge. No signs of recent fire, just soil that had been scorched, and something strange in the ash. Symbols carved into bark. Not letters, not runes, just marks. He said they were told not to bring it up, that the site had been logged and closed off. I asked if he'd ever gone back. He didn't answer. Just stood up, walked to the kitchen, came back with an envelope. Inside was a photo. Faded, time-warped, curled at the corners. It showed a tree, tall, dead-looking, but still rooted, and along the trunk were rows of deep horizontal cuts. Not random. Patterned. And beneath it, in the dirt, a circle made of stones. It looked like a ritual site. Charlie said he took the picture on instinct, then buried the roll of film for years. He only had it developed after he left the service. Said it didn't feel right until then. I asked him if the clearing matched any official map trails. He said no. It was off-grid, maybe 2 miles past Hollow Point. That name again? I'd seen it before on that scrap of paper I found behind the AV cabinet, a Ranger substation that had been decommissioned for decades. I thanked him, left the photo tucked in my bag, and drove straight to the county records office. The woman at the counter looked at me sideways when I asked about trail overlays from 1980 to 2000. I told her it was for a private project. She took down my number and said she'd call if anything turned up. I didn't expect her to, but 3 days later, a manila folder showed up at my apartment. No return address, no postage, just left between the door and the welcome mat. Inside was a single map, printed in low resolution, probably a scan from an old Ranger file. But there, near the bottom right quadrant, marked in faint pencil, was a path. Unnamed, no mileage listed. It branched off from an official trail and curled west, looping back toward the tree line. Someone had written 2 words along the edge, Black Hollow. Not Station Hollow. Not Hollow Point. Black Hollow. I hadn't heard that name before. I sat with it for a long time, tracing the path over and over with my finger, like maybe it would unlock something. That night, I took the photo Charlie had given me and laid it beside the map. The tree line matched. Not perfectly, but close. I'd seen that formation before, once on a camping trip back in '97. We'd hiked through that part of the forest. I remembered the way the pines bent inward like they were leaning in to listen. I thought it was strange back then. Beautiful, maybe. But looking at it now, it felt like a warning. The more I stared at the 2 artifacts, map and photo, the more I felt like they were trying to point to something just outside the frame. Like a message whispered to someone else left behind for whoever was still looking. That's when I remembered something Sophie said to me the week before the trip. We were in the library. She was sketching on a napkin. She'd drawn a ring of trees tight closed. I asked if it was a dream. She looked up and said, "It's a place, but only if you believe in it long enough." At the time, I didn't understand what she meant. Now I wasn't sure she'd been speaking metaphorically. Because whatever had happened in those woods didn't just take people. It left pieces behind: maps, sounds, signs. Not loud, not clear, but there, waiting for someone to find them. And I was starting to think maybe that someone was me. I waited for the right day to go. Not a special date or anniversary, just a day when everything else went quiet. It was a Tuesday. Forecast said light wind, no rain. I packed a duffel. Nothing too heavy. Water flashlight, old yearbook pages, the photo Charlie gave me, the map with Black Hollow marked in pencil. I didn't leave a note. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. If I started explaining, someone would try to stop me. Or worse, they'd listen too closely. The drive out was steady. Empty 2-lane roads cutting through open fields and slow climbs into pine country. The deeper I got, the more the air thinned. Less traffic, less noise. Just the pulse of tires on gravel and the hum of everything I hadn't said over the years. I parked farther out than I needed to. Didn't want to risk leaving the car too close. There was a cutoff trail near the ranger station, ruins mostly overgrown but still marked by faint stone piles and an old trailhead sign nearly rotted through. I followed the map as best I could. The deeper I walked, the more the forest changed. Not suddenly, just slight shifts. Air got stiller. Branches hung lower. Sunlight dimmed, even though the sky above was clear. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was attention. The woods wanted to be noticed. I reached the edge of what had once been a service clearing. No structures remained. Just the faint impression of foundations, and beyond them a narrow path that curled into denser brush. That wasn't on any official map, but it was on mine. Black Hollow. The pencil line wasn't labeled with coordinates, just direction. So I followed it. After about 30 minutes, I saw something to the right. Tucked behind a stand of cedar, an old sign nailed into a tree. Letters barely visible beneath years of lichen. A single word carved deep, stay. No symbol, no explanation, just the word. It was around then that I started hearing the creak, or what I thought was a creak. But the closer I got, the less it sounded like water. It had rhythm too steady, too deliberate, like someone pacing slowly through undergrowth heel first. I froze, waited. The sound stopped. I kept walking. Eventually, the trees parted just enough to open into a slight bowl in the land. A hollow. The grass was thin, the dirt gray, and in the center was the tree from Charlie's photo. Dead trunk, tall bark stripped in patterns like scar tissue. At its base, a ring of stones. Some cracked, some recently turned. I stood at the edge and looked for signs of people footprints, disturbed leaves wrappers. Nothing fresh, but someone had been there. Recently. The ground in front of the circle had been cleared, swept clean in a way nature doesn't do on its own. I didn't step into the ring. Not yet. I knelt just outside it and took out the yearbook page. It was the back spread, the panoramic photo of the class of '99 at the homecoming rally. I'd circled the faces of those identified among the 17. There were still names missing. I counted the uncircled ones again. 9. Same number as the ones not yet confirmed. That was when I realized something. Of the 9, 3 had never been visible in any of the official photos. They'd missed picture day or stood in the back, obscured by taller students. Their names were listed, but their faces weren't preserved. Not in any school archives. And all 3 of them had been known to hang out off-campus woodshop students, auto club kids, who skipped lunch to sit behind the gym and smoke. I remembered that because I used to sneak out back too. That's how I'd overheard them talking once. About a place in the forest where the older ones gathered. I thought they were just being dramatic, making up stories. Now I wasn't so sure. I stepped into the ring. Nothing happened. No wind, no shift in air pressure. Just silence. I crouched and touched one of the stones. Smooth, polished on the inside edge, like it had been turned over many times. I took out the flashlight and scanned the tree. The grooves in the bark weren't just random. They repeated. 1 long curve, 3 short, across, then a square. It looked like a pattern I'd seen before. Sophie's sketch. Not the ones in the news, the private ones. She'd drawn a page of symbols once half erased. I remembered because I'd asked if they were part of a game. She said they came from a dream. I used to think that meant nothing. I don't think that anymore. I stood there for a long time, just listening. No birds, no wind, just the weight of trees pressing in. Then something caught my eye. Behind the tree, tucked into a hollow in the trunk, was a bundle wrapped in plastic. I reached for it carefully, pulled it out. Inside was a notebook, weather-worn, softened at the corners. On the first page, written in pencil, were 3 names: Claire Benton, Sophie Lynn, Marcus Avery. Underneath them, 1 sentence we didn't forget. We remembered the way out. That was it. No date, no other writing. Just those names and that line. I flipped through the rest of the pages. Most were blank. A few had smudged pencil marks, indents from things that had been written and later torn out. I took a photo of each one. Then I wrapped it back up, slid it into my bag, and backed out of the circle. I didn't run. I didn't speak. Just walked the way I came, one step at a time, listening to make sure the pacing sound hadn't returned. It hadn't. Not yet. When I reached the trailhead again, the air felt different, lighter, like something had shifted behind me. I got in the car and drove straight back to town. That night, I spread the photos on my kitchen table and laid them beside Sophie's old drawing. The patterns matched. Not just the lines, but the placement, the ring of stones, the tree at the center, a second ring farther out almost like a boundary. One part of the sketch had always puzzled me, tiny marks between the outer trees barely visible, but now I could see what they were. Figures, watching, or waiting. And in the corner of that sketch, a small handwritten note, black hollow, is the middle. They start from the outside. I read that line twice, then a third time, and I felt it settle into my bones like something old and unfinished. Because if Black Hollow was the middle, then something else was coming from outside it, closer, every year. I didn't sleep that night. The sketches were still on the table, lined up like puzzle pieces I hadn't earned the right to solve. Sophie's drawing, the page from the buried notebook, the rough map of Black Hollow. Each one felt like a whisper from a voice I used to know, except now it was coming from under the floorboards. I kept staring at the outer ring, the one Sophie had drawn faintly, as if she didn't want it seen. The marks between the trees weren't just decorative. They had spacing, weight, and tension. And they weren't watching the center. They were facing outward. That didn't make sense at first. Then I looked closer at the yearbook again. Of the 9 students who'd never been officially identified, 4 had backgrounds that barely showed up in district records. One of them, Daniel Meeks, had no middle school file. No medical exemption, no emergency contact. The address listed for him was the same as another student, but with a different apartment number. I remembered him vaguely quiet, older than the rest of us. Wore a long coat, even in May. He was in woodshop. Never smiled in photos. He'd sat near the front of the bus behind the driver. That detail came back to me slowly, like dust lifting from something stored too long. I couldn't find anything about his family online. No obituary. No missing person notice separate from the class of '99 roster. But his name did come up once attached to a property lease on the outskirts of Ashland. The building had been torn down in 2003 after a fire. No cause listed. I flagged it, saved the screenshot. Then I turned to the tape again. The one with Claire's voice. I still hadn't played it since the first time, but now I needed to know something. I took it to a friend of mine from back in Portland. Amy used to work audio for a regional podcast network. I told her it was a college project. She didn't ask questions. Just cleaned the file, isolated background noise, and slowed it to 80% speed. We listened together in her studio. The moment Claire spoke, the room went still. Her voice was shaky, quiet, like she was speaking through fabric. "We're not alone. Tell them we tried." Then silence. But this time, we noticed something I hadn't before. Underneath her words, there was a faint shuffling, and a second voice. Male. Deep. Not speaking, just breathing slow and deliberate as if it was standing near her, but facing away. The waveform confirmed it. It wasn't distortion. It was someone else. When the tape ended, Amy asked me if it was real. I didn't answer. I just packed it back up, thanked her, and left. The drive home was quiet. But the question stayed with me. If Claire had left that message, if she'd recorded it knowing someone else was there, why leave it in a cassette wrapped in plastic, hidden where only someone who remembered would look? The more I turned it over, the more I started to believe it wasn't just a clue. It was permission. Or maybe a warning. And if that was true, then there had to be more. I started checking old campus facilities, storage units, off-site archives, anywhere leftover material from the school might have ended up. Most of it had been digitized or destroyed, but a retired administrator from Forest Grove, Mr. Brody, kept a garage full of boxes. He used to run year-end inventory, said he didn't trust digital systems. I found him through a librarian who remembered his name. He lived about 30 minutes out in a small 2-bedroom with a rusted mailbox and a dog that barked like it was running out of time. Brody let me in reluctantly, offered no coffee, no smile, just pointed to a stack of banker's boxes near the back wall of the garage and said, "You've got 20 minutes. I didn't waste time. Most of the contents were typical faculty memos, supply orders, graduation programs. But one box was different. It had a strip of duct tape across the top and the word field written in faded black marker. Inside were 4 VHS tapes, a few Polaroids, and a file folder marked AV Unedited. The Polaroids showed students huddled near the bus, some smiling, some mid-laugh, some blurry. One showed Sophie turned slightly away, sketchbook open on her knees. Another showed Claire, eyes half closed, leaning against a tree. But in the background of that shot, just beyond the depth of focus, was a figure in gray. No face, just fabric, long sleeves, arms lowered, watching. I asked Brody if he knew who'd taken the pictures. He didn't. Said they'd been found in a camera bag returned after the disappearance logged, then never picked up. I thanked him, offered to digitize them for the archive. He waved me off, said they weren't his to worry about anymore. I left with the box. Back home, I played the tapes one at a time. Most were raw footage from school events, pep rallies, assemblies, drama rehearsals. The final tape was different. No labels, no timestamp, just static at first. Then it cut to handheld footage of the campground. Not Cedar Hollow, the place we were supposed to be. This was different. Trees tighter, ground uneven, audio cutting in and out. A shot of students moving in small groups carrying bags. Then a close-up of someone whispering, too muffled to hear clearly. And then a wide shot. The tree. The same one from Black Hollow. And standing beside it again, that gray figure. Not moving, just standing, arms at its sides like a scarecrow left upright. Then the tape cut to black. Nothing else. I rewound it 3 times. Same ending. No explanation. No credits. Just black. That night, I opened the notebook from the tree again. The one with the names. I ran my fingers over the pencil line beneath them. We didn't forget. We remembered the way out. And for the first time, I understood what it meant. They hadn't escaped by accident. They'd planned it. Maybe not all of them, but some. They'd seen what was coming. They'd chosen their path, left behind messages, sketches, evidence. Not to be saved, but to make sure someone would know. Someone who remembered. And maybe that's why I was still here. Not because I'd gotten lucky, but because they'd made sure I would be the one to return. The only question now was what they needed me to find next. The last piece didn't come from a file or a photograph. It came from someone I hadn't seen since the week after the memorial, Mrs. Elaine Benton, Claire's mother. I hadn't spoken to her since the year everything fell apart, and I wouldn't have now if she hadn't been standing at the edge of my driveway one morning in June. I'd just come back from the Archive Center in Ashland, and there she was. Same posture, same neatly pressed coat. Her hair longer now, gray at the roots. She didn't say hello, just looked at me and said, "You're the only one who's been looking in the right direction." I opened the gate and let her inside. We sat in the kitchen, neither of us touching the coffee I poured. She brought a manila envelope sealed with tape corners, soft from being carried too long. She said she found it in the crawl space beneath Claire's old bedroom last fall, wedged behind an air duct wrapped in cloth. She hadn't shown it to police. They'd only say it was grief, she said. Inside were 3 things. A photograph I'd never seen Claire and Sophie in the woods standing on what looked like a moss-covered foundation. Their expressions weren't playful. They looked aware. Not scared, but alert. The second item was a fragment of paper torn from a journal. The handwriting was Claire's. Just 2 lines slanted uneven. If we let them name it, it becomes real. If we draw it first, maybe it forgets. The third item was a cassette tape. I recognized the kind, cheap plastic, no label. I asked if she wanted me to play it. She shook her head no. I listened once. That was enough. But she still handed it over. Said I'd know when to use it. After she left, I waited 2 days. I didn't want to be careless with it. When I finally played the tape, I sat in the hallway, not the kitchen, not in view of any windows. The audio was clearer than the first. This wasn't a recording of panic. It was deliberate. Claire speaking again, but not alone. A male voice came in halfway through. "Marcus." I hadn't heard his voice in 20 years. His tone was low, steady. They weren't narrating what had happened. They were planning for what might. Claire said, "If we don't all make it, they'll keep trying. They think time resets everything." Marcus replied, "Then we have to leave it behind, something they can't erase." Then silence. No rustling, no footsteps, just breath. The last thing on the tape was a sound I couldn't place at first, a kind of chime. Faint, but patterned. 3 tones. Then 3 more. Then none. I played it back 4 times, just that section. On the 4th listen, I remembered where I'd heard it. The same chime played over the intercom system during our last fire drill at Forest Grove High. It had been broken since 97 played 3 tones instead of the full alarm. I checked the dates. That tape had been recorded the week before the trip, which meant they knew something before we boarded that bus. They'd been watching, listening, trying to make sense of it. Claire, Sophie, Marcus, maybe others. Not just as students, as witnesses. I started digging through local zoning archives, looking for records of renovations to the school in the mid-90s. Found a contractor's note from 1996, sub-level utility access sealed. Alarm system rerouted. East wing no longer in service. I hadn't thought about that hallway in years. It had been closed off, something about asbestos or old wiring. But some of us used to sneak down there anyway. It led to the original boiler room and some unfinished storage space. I remembered once finding a small panel bolted shut near the end of the hall. No label, just metal. We thought it was locked from age. Now I wasn't so sure. I called a friend who'd stayed in town, Gabe, former maintenance staff, told him I was writing a local history piece, asked if the East Wing was still boarded up. He said no. They opened it last fall to repurpose the classrooms. Said one of the storage rooms had a sealed utility panel nobody could identify. Said the hinges were on the inside. I drove there the next morning, brought the sketchbook, brought the notebook from the hollow, brought the cassette still in its case. The school looked the same from the outside, a little smaller, brick faded, windows cleaner. I checked in under a fake name, said I was with the alumni archive. They gave me a lanyard and a map. The East Wing smelled like new paint and lemon cleaner, but the bones were the same. I found the panel Gabe mentioned. It sat just behind a row of stacked desks, almost perfectly flush with the wall. No keyhole, no signage. I pressed my hand against it. Cold. I tapped once. Hollow. Then I noticed something scratched into the corner, barely visible in the light. A symbol I'd seen in Sophie's drawing. A square broken by 2 diagonal lines. I traced it with my thumb. Didn't open anything. Didn't shift. But I knew then that I was standing at a boundary. Maybe not between rooms. Maybe not even between places. But between what we were told to remember and what we were meant to forget. I didn't try to open it. Not that day. Not yet. Instead, I left a copy of the photo. Claire and Sophie. Their eyes clear-focused, like they could already see the future coming toward them. I tucked the photo into the corner of the panel where it wouldn't be obvious, but wouldn't be hidden either. Then I walked out. As I crossed the parking lot, I heard it again. The same pattern. 3 tones. Faint. Distant. Not from the building. From somewhere behind it. Beyond the old gym. Toward the trees. I didn't follow it. Not yet. I just stood there and listened. And for the first time, I felt like they might still be trying to reach us. Not with fear, but with direction. And all I had to do now was decide if I was ready to go where they had gone. I went back one last time. Not because I thought the panel would open or that the woods would suddenly hand over answers, but because I couldn't let the story end in silence. Not after everything we'd found. I stood in the East Wing corridor where the light doesn't quite reach the far wall, and I waited. There was no sound this time. No chime. No presence. Just the hum of the building settling into itself. I took the cassette from my coat pocket, the one Claire recorded with Marcus. I didn't play it. I just held it there in the quiet and placed it down beside the panel. Maybe it was never meant for us to listen again. Maybe it was meant to be returned. I thought of Sophie. Of the way she looked in that photo standing just behind Claire, watching the trees like she knew they wouldn't stay quiet. I thought of Marcus's voice on the tape, calm, steady, like someone who understood what it meant to leave a trace, even if no one believed it yet. Most of all, I thought of Claire writing those words in the margins of a notebook nobody was supposed to find. If we draw it first, maybe it forgets. I don't think it forgot, but I think she was trying to protect the rest of us from something she couldn't name. And in the end, maybe that's what memory is, a place where we keep the names that would have otherwise disappeared. Gabe told me the school plans to renovate that entire wing next year. Said they're turning it into an art space. I didn't tell him about the mark carved into the panel. Didn't mention the notebooks or the sketch of the buried bus or the tape that made its way back across decades. Some things don't belong in paperwork. Some truths only land when you say them out loud. I never found the full explanation. No map, no confession. Just a series of small, unshakable facts that didn't line up with the official version. But I've learned something in all this. Maybe what matters isn't proving what happened. Maybe it's refusing to pretend it didn't. There were 15 of us who boarded that bus. 4 who never came back. 3 whose names were almost erased. And the rest of us who carried the weight without knowing what we were holding. I still don't know if I'll ever learn the full story, but I know this: they left us pieces, and pieces can build something. If this story stayed with you, if it made you remember someone you hadn't thought about in years, consider passing it on. So, no name gets left behind.